For years, the United States led the soybean trade. Then Brazil took over. The strange part is that this was not caused by just one bad season in the US or one lucky harvest in Brazil. Brazil's rise came from a deeper shift that had been building for decades. It involved new farmland, new crop science, new roads and ports, and huge demand from overseas, especially from China. By 2013, Brazil had already passed the United States as the world's largest soybean exporter, and more recent USDA reports still show Brazil's shipping record or near record volumes. Soybeans may not sound exciting, but they sit inside a huge part of modern life. Processed soybeans are the world's biggest source of animal protein feed and the second largest source of vegetable oil. That means soy is tied to chicken, pork, eggs, cooking oil, biodiesel, and the global food system more broadly. So when one country becomes the dominant exporter, that affects prices, trade routes, ports, farmers, feed mills, and even geopolitics. The short answer to this video is simple. Brazil exports so many soybeans because it built a system that could produce a lot of soy, move a lot of soy, and sell a lot of soy to the biggest buyers in the world. The long answer is more interesting, because it shows how geography, science, infrastructure, currency, and global demand all connected. First, what changed? Brazil did not suddenly discover soybeans. What changed was scale. Over time, soy production moved from older farming regions in the south toward the center-west, especially states like Mato Grosso. A lot of that shift happened because Brazil learned how to farm more successfully in tropical savanna regions, especially the Cerrado, while also expanding roads, storage, and export routes. In USDA's 2025 Brazil Oilseeds report, the Center-West alone accounted for over a third of the country's soybean planted area and production, and CONAB data cited in that report showed Brazil's soybean planted area rising by about 20% over the last 5 seasons. That is the real foundation of the story. Brazil did not win soy exports by having one advantage. It won by stacking several advantages together. Before Brazil took the lead for a long time, the United States was the main soybean power. Even in 2013, USDA described Brazil as only forecast to surpass the United States for soybean production for the first time in the 2013-14 season. But that same period marked a bigger turning point. A card review based on USDA data notes that in 2013 Brazil surpassed the United States as the world's largest soybean exporter. That matters because being the biggest producer and being the biggest exporter are related, but they are not exactly the same thing. Export dominance means Brazil was not just growing soy. It was moving soy into world markets at massive scale. So the turning point was not just Brazil grows soy now. The turning point was, Brazil built enough production and enough export capacity to become the main supplier to the world. The science behind the expansion. One reason Brazil became so strong in soy was that it turned land once seen as difficult into productive farmland. Embrapa, Brazil's agricultural research corporation, says Embrapa soybean was founded in 1975 and contributed decisively to making soybean cultivation viable in Brazil's tropical region. Embrapa also describes itself as having become a world reference in technologies for soybean production in tropical regions. That matters because large parts of central Brazil are not naturally the same as the temperate farm regions many people picture when they think of soybean agriculture. Part of that story is soil. Embrapa publications explain that growing soybeans in Cerrado soils requires reducing soil acidity and building up soil fertility, including liming and other soil correction methods. In simple terms, Brazil did not just expand into new land. It had to make that land work for soy at scale. That took research, seed development, field management, and years of adaptation. This is also why the Brazil soy story is not just about having more empty space. Plenty of land means little unless you can actually farm it efficiently. Brazil's edge came from combining land with technology. The Cerrado and the move inland. Another big part of the story is where the soybean frontier moved. Card's review notes that over the last 4 decades, Brazil's soybean production shifted from the traditional agricultural south to central west Brazil, especially Mato Grosso. It links that shift to a long-term strategy to cultivate the Cerrado, more investment in the soybean industry after trade liberalization, and strong global prices that encouraged expansion in South America. The same review also points to Brazil's adaptation of a double-cropping soy corn system in the savanna as one of the factors that increased competitiveness. This matters because once soy farming becomes strong in a place like Mato Grosso, the scale gets very serious very quickly. That region is large, mechanized, and deeply tied to export agriculture. USDA's 2025 Brazil report also notes that Brazil is focusing part of its future crop expansion on converting degraded pastureland, rather than treating all growth as entirely new frontier clearing. Even so, the exact numbers vary by source and methodology, and the report itself notes a gap between different estimates of degraded pastureland. That is a good place to be careful. The expansion story is real, but some details around land categories and future expansion potential are debated or measured differently. Logistics. The old weakness that got better for years, Brazil's soybean system had a major weakness. Moving crops from the interior to export ports was expensive and slow. That is one reason the US stayed competitive for so long. But Brazil's logistics gradually improved, and that changed the export game. Card's analysis says Brazil's competitiveness depends not only on production technology but also on declining transportation costs from an expanding infrastructure network. It gives one especially useful example. When Brazil finished paving a stretch of BR-163 to Marituba in late 2019, the truck time from northern Mato Grosso to that northern terminal was cut from about 3 days to about 1.5 days. That made northern ports much more important for handling Brazil's growing grain and oilseed output. Recent official Brazilian logistics data points the same way. A 2025 CONAB release says corn and soybean exports through the northern arc rose from 36.7 million tons in 2020 to 57.6 million tons in 2024, roughly a 57% increase, driven by multimodal infrastructure investments, rail expansion, and greater use of waterways in the Amazon region. In other words, Brazil did not just grow more soy. It got better at getting that soy out to sea. That is a huge deal in export markets. If you can lower the cost and time of moving soybeans from inland farms to global buyers, you become much harder to compete with. China changed the scale of the story even if very efficient exporter needs buyers. Brazil had them. A FarmDoc analysis of the US-Brazil-China soybean trade triangle says China accounts for about 60% of worldwide soybean imports and has increasingly depended on South America, especially Brazil. It also notes that from 2019 to 2023, about 73% of Brazil's exported soybeans went to China. USDA's 2025 Brazil oilseeds report showed China importing 72.5 million metric tons of Brazilian soybeans in 2024, far ahead of any other destination. That helps explain why Brazil exports so many soybeans. It is serving the biggest soybean importing market in the world. China's demand is tied heavily to animal protein feed and edible oils, so this is not a niche trade. It is a massive, structural part of the global food economy. The US-China trade war also mattered. Card notes that Brazil gained extra competitiveness over the United States during that period, when China imposed retaliatory tariffs on US soybeans. The trade war did not create Brazil's soybean rise from nothing, but it strengthened a trend that was already underway. It is not only about exporting raw beans. Another reason Brazil's soybean story is bigger than many people realize is that soy is not just one product. It becomes meal, oil, feed, food ingredients, and fuel. USDA's Brazil Oilseeds report says internal demand is growing because of stronger demand for soybean oil for biofuels and continued meal demand for animal feed. It forecasts soybean crush at 57 million metric tons for 2025-26. The same report says about 80% of Brazil's biodiesel is derived from soybean oil. A later USDA, FAS Brazil update said domestic soybean processing was also expected to rise, helped by livestock feed demand and biodiesel mandates. This is important because it shows Brazil is not only shipping whole soybeans abroad. It is also processing part of the crop at home and building strength across the soybean chain. That makes the system more valuable and more resilient. So why did Brazil beat the US? The cleanest answer is this: Brazil added capacity faster than the United States added defenses. Brazil had more room to expand planted area. It developed tropical soybean farming more effectively over time. It improved export logistics. It benefited from a weaker currency at key moments. It sold into rapidly growing Chinese demand. And during the US-China trade war, it gained even more room in the market. Cards review lists advanced soybean technology, the soy corn system, currency depreciation, and lower transportation costs as key parts of Brazil's rising competitiveness. Meanwhile, recent USDA outlooks show how the balance looks today. In the 2025 Brazil Annual Report, USDA, FAS projected Brazil's soybean exports at 112 million metric tons in 2025-26. A later Brazil update raised the export projection to 114 million metric tons, supported by expanded port capacity and growing demand from China. So when people ask why Brazil exports so many soybeans, the answer is not because Brazil grows soy. The answer is because Brazil built one of the world's most powerful soybean systems. The sensitive part of the story. There is also a part of this story that gets a lot of attention, and rightly so: environmental concern. USDA's 2025 Brazil report notes that environmental concerns, especially around deforestation linked to soybean cultivation, have intensified scrutiny of Brazilian agriculture, particularly from the European Union. The report also points to new EU rules aimed at keeping deforestation-linked products out of that market. Cards review likewise ties part of the soybean frontier shift to the cultivation of the Cerrado and the movement of production into central West Brazil. Brazil became the leading soybean exporter because it solved several big problems at once. It expanded soybean farming into central Brazil. It used research and technology to make tropical production work better. It improved roads, ports, and northern export routes. It connected that system to giant overseas demand, especially from China. And over time, that combination proved strong enough to push Brazil past the United States. And that is what makes this such a powerful everyday info story. Soybeans may look like just another crop, but behind them is a story about infrastructure, science, global trade, food, fuel, and how one country built an export machine around an ordinary bean. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe. Then tap the bell icon to turn on all notifications so you never miss any of our future videos.